What's going on, everybody? This is Gonz. Welcome to a short flyby for Canary Cry Radio and Canary Cry News Talk. Every week, we prepare several stories for the Canary Cry News Talk episodes, but there's only so much time on air. So we have to chop a lot of articles, and this is an opportunity for me to at least run down those articles and give my 2 cents real briefly. Ultimately, this might be consolidated into the Face Like the Sun channel as it is back, but we'll have to see about that. Everything is up in the air. But today, I wanted to run down a few of the stories left out from episode 823 of Canary Cry News Talk. Go to canarycrynewstalk.com or canarycry.party to look at all the links. That's our link tree where we have hundreds of links. No, we don't have hundreds of links. We have a lot of links. Go there, check it out. Before we jump in, I just want to say God bless to everybody. May the Lord's light shine upon you today as you hang out, do your thing, work hard, and do the things that you have to do, all in the glory of God. So let's jump right in. First off, Vice.com. Do you guys remember Vice? They were so anti-establishment and cool, but ultimately they became the establishment, and now they're still around. But it's interesting how things come full circle. This article is titled, Kanye West says he and Jay-Z are gods in new social media rant. Kanye says that, quote, only gods can make gods, end quote. Now, of course, Kanye doing all kinds of 180s and 90-degree turns and 360s and 240s and all kinds of stuff on social media. He's a pretty good indicator of cultural sentiment and even countercultural sentiment, or maybe the edge of the blade that is changing the landscape of culture. Because he's hitting on all the taboo issues, and the most taboo issue being Nazis and swastikas, and he's done a psychological jujitsu on the topic by bringing up the fact that once again, it was an ancient symbol that had nothing to do with how it was used in the Third Reich, and I would argue maybe the Fourth Reich now. But let's see what Vice says about this. Kanye West has been on an epic run in terms of hot takes and bad decisions, and in his newest social media rant, he likens himself and his mentor Jay-Z to, quote, gods. Now, gods is capitalized with the capital G here, but also it's hard to tell because with Ye, he capitalizes everything. Taking to X, formerly Twitter, Ye penned, quote, only gods can make gods. Jay-Z made me a god, end quote. All capital letters, no captions, like no commas or periods or anything, just all just one big rant. Ye's 2025 kicked into high gear last month when he went on an anti-Semitic tirade, proclaiming, I love Hitler and I am a Nazi. This came after he made similar comments in 2022, which he apologized for in 2023. So that was like the test run. See, we're testing the waters where everyone is at with this topic. Quote, I'm never apologizing for my Jewish comments, he wrote amidst a flurry of racist statements in his social media meltdown. Quote, I can say whatever bleep I want forever. He goes on to express his distaste for the way a certain group of people, namely the Jewish, present themselves in this discussion in terms of the legacy infrastructure. And that's partly what this is too. When there is a shift in communications networks, there is an inevitable exposing of the man behind the curtain, or the people or the individuals or groups that are controlling the narrative, controlling the message. And, you can say that part of the whole game was to expose them. It's been the plan the whole time. That's why the world is a stage and all these things, they're tropes that everyone is very familiar with now, but it really is true in the sense that they put on a show, they pulled everything to the far left, and they created this wave that returns to the right or returns to conservative. And they were, I think right now, are in the process of harvesting a lot of attention and minds during this shift. And it's easy to fall into the hype when it comes to it, especially because the central issue on this is religion, it's faith, it's Christianity, it's Judaism, it's Islam, it's the nation state, the current nation state of Israel and Israel Jewish people, that whole thing, the whole topic brings me to a comment that I'd like to make on the issue because the challenging thing here, and a way to combat this with gentleness, kindness, and a sound mind, is to discuss what we are talking about. Okay, so I see a lot of sentiment on the internet about anti Zionism, anti Mossad, all those issues. And those are contemporary issues that, or labels, perhaps you can say. And, the stance that I have taken, and many people that have followed myself or Canary Cry Radio, has been that this is a spiritual issue. Like, that's been the big message for 15 years now. It's like, hey, this is a spiritual thing, it's a spiritual war. And so these names and labels, yeah, those are the contemporary language labels, phrases that we use to communicate these things. But this is a thing that's been going on for a long, long time. And this shift in communications network when it comes to being on the internet, especially from Web 2 to Web 3, because Web 2 was kind of a legacy media clone. It was a fork of legacy media. Television was king for a long time. Television, MTV was probably the peak, in the 1980s when it comes to television having a stronghold on the masses. And maybe in the 90s, well, the internet was introduced, 90s still maybe the best work in terms of the films and movies and propaganda and all those things. And you can clearly tell after 9/11 there was a decline, but that decline was also sparked by 9/11, September 11th. And that shifted culture tremendously. And it was almost, now that I look back, it's almost like it's these are all software upgrades, It's kind of like, okay, we're going to do 1.0 or maybe just go alpha, get out of beta, go into the full mode uh, with that. And then COVID is kind of 2.0, you can just bust it out. We're getting this new era. And they're repeating things that they had done. And when I say they, I mean the principalities and powers, perhaps intertwined with certain bloodlines or certain groups or institutions and people. And that's always been true. It's always been true. But humans come and go, at least right now, until the Lord returns. And those of us who believe are promised eternal bodies. So we got to look at the spiritual mechanics going on behind the scenes, right? And that's what we do. So now that all that is out of the way, I wanted to just mention that when we're talking about the topic of Israel, you really got to understand where people are coming from. And I think this will disarm a lot of the arguments because there's just no clarity when it comes to this. And I don't understand why more people, I guess I do understand why. It's because this is part of the operation to keep everyone all mad and, yelling at each other and stuff like that. But uh, there's never any clarity. And I'm guilty of this too. Like, this is just the nature of the topic. There's never any clarity as to what someone means when they say the name Israel or Jew. Because when you look at the Bible, there are many instances of the use of the word Israel in many different contexts. So, for example, Jacob, the person, the name given to Jacob after wrestling with God is Israel. Genesis 32:28. That's one use of the name that begins the nation, the ethnic lineage. But clearly, there's a progression here, right? And then you have obviously the ethnic nation of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, which are Yahweh's chosen people. This is true. Exodus is pretty clear about that. But also, Exodus reveals something very interesting. Exodus 19:5 specifically, where it says, "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine." Now, it's interesting because it's almost, God is almost setting them up to fail. And I know this is a common understanding of the laws, of the Old Testament and the Ten Commandments and things of that nature. Like, hey, they weren't meant to be perfectly followed because the point was it's impossible for humanity to follow these things to perfection. And, this is what God expects of us. And this is how God created us to be in perfect harmony with nature and God and everything else. That whole concept, the Edenic state, is something that is only under the total obedience of God. And if we continue on to verse 6, "And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel." So there's this very powerful condition set to the ethnic nation state of Israel. And it's interesting because they are the chosen people that God chose through this ethnic line. However, the whole point was failure. And when you think about it that way, it's like, wow, that is intense. That is that's an intense concept. And it's almost necessary as a way for God to actually become human, the whole plan to become human and to die for the sins of the entire world. It had to happen some way, right? Unless you want it to be completely alien to humanity or separate from humanity. No, humanity is something different than the rest of nature, the rest of creation. There's something special about humanity, obviously. Look around. So, that condition for failure, it's not just for this ethnic nation of Israel, it applies to all of humanity. And that's where, you got to pull back, you got to zoom out to see that, yes, it starts with Israel, this ethnic group, Israel, ethnic nation, Israel, through the person Jacob. But ultimately, it spreads to all of us. Like the message that is spread here is relevant to all of us. And it makes sense as to why Jesus came, why he did what he did, and why everyone can be brought to eternal life with simply believing. So there's other ways in which Israel is contextualized in the Bible. You have the political nation of Israel, many times referenced Israel as a political, geopolitical kingdom with kings and priests and, an army and the whole thing. There's also the faithful remnant of Israel, the subset of ethnic Israel who remained faithful to Yahweh. So again, it's not so much about the ethnicity or, the only thing that matters is people being faithful to Yahweh, to God. That's the only thing. Cody agrees. And this is where you start to see why defining what you mean by Israel is so important. I just mentioned the faithful remnant of Israel, right? Well, you also have the apostate Israel, the ethnic Israel that turned away from God and faced judgment. There's multiple judgment passages and verses and even chapters and books in the Old Testament that reference this. So the contrast of that becomes very important to understand when you're talking about this topic. And then, of course, there's spiritual Israel. And this is where you get into the New Testament, you get into Galatians, you get into Romans. And yeah, eventually I'd like to put together an entire comprehensive list and everything that shows all this. And maybe someone's already done it. But there are also clear references, again, in the New Testament where the church, the entire church, is seen as true Israel, composed of all believers in Christ. And then, of course, there's the hotly debated future restored Israel, where, look, there are passages in the Old and New Testament about a restored Israel. And many believe that 1948 was that year when this was fulfilled. But again, it would mean that one out of many uses of the word Israel is maybe fulfilled. And that is hotly debated again. There are some who are highly skeptical that this was a fulfillment, but rather a duping of the fulfillment. And perhaps we are being set up for something similar. And I would argue that, it's both and. It's one of those necessary contradictions that exist in reality, where you have people that think it's fulfilled, but have steered that fake or, perceived fulfillment. But then also it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in itself because they're trying so hard to make it happen that it actually starts to happen. But when it comes down to it, it's really the relevancy of the topic in culture, in Western culture. I mean, this is Western culture, this is America, this is 2025. And the thing that is driving everybody absolutely insane is this topic of Israel and Jews. And it became a bigger issue. Now, look, it's one of those things where I had been wrestling with for a while. And perhaps because, and I'm not saying I'm special or anything, I was just looking. I noticed that this trend was happening over a span of a few years. So again, when you zoom out and you look at this whole issue and this topic and how long this tension has been around in terms of recorded history, especially Western history, I mean, this this issue of these people, the Jews and Israel, has been impactful somewhere in the world throughout history. And now that we have the internet and we have globalized, or the network has globalized in a sense, the communication network, There is everything's on the table. All the things from every ethnic group, people, whatever, everything is on the table in terms of cultural assessment and analysis. And obviously, at the heart of it is perhaps the most weaponized topic that at least in the generation I was born into, it's this topic of Nazis and topic of World War II and Hitler and the whole thing. I could go on and on, but I'm going to pause there and summarize that the idea being when we talk about Israel with one another, with our friends, our family, try to be very clear about what you mean. Like, do you mean tribal Israel? Do you mean the prophetic or idealized Israel? Is Israel as the metaphor for a suffering servant, as in the book of Isaiah? The heavenly Israel, the New Jerusalem. Like, what are you talking about when you say Israel? It might be a good way to just dive into Scripture and have a conversation instead of just calling people Zionist, Mossad, whatever. And look, that I'm not denying that is there, like that's clearly a problem. So to round it out, Vice, Kanye West says he and Jay-Z are gods. I mean, there you go. I mean, these who is telling them? Who is giving Jay-Z and now Kanye the ideas, the thoughts, and the whatever serotonin boost or neurochemical boost they get when they hear or feel that, oh, I am a god now. Like, look at me, I'm a god like Jay-Z. Just buying straight into the lie. It goes right back to Genesis 3 and the garden and the serpent telling Eve, ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. But that brings me to the Jerusalem Post. And the headline, can God's existence be proven with mathematics? And I find this fascinating because the academic pivot to theism as a more cohesive philosophical argument to underpin science and math and everything we're going towards with the reenchantment, ultimately what I think is going to be about the quantum field. I think that'll be another way to distract people from the fact that God is really the one behind everything. It's just laying the groundwork for people to accept a messianic figure, in my opinion, especially with all this technology and all this new science, and we're accessing this thing. Whoever accesses it and has tremendous influence, yes, they will be perceived by some as gods. I mean, they already do. I mean, some people, we just went over this. So I think it ties together that you have to lay down the academic foundation, the pillars of the scholarly realms in order for certain deceptions to work out. And not that they're wrong about God and mathematics. It's just that now it's time. Now it's time to bring it to the academic layer so that there is a strong perceived foundation for such things as an actual messianic figure or messiah. This article interviews or speaks to Dr. Willie Soon, who's a Harvard astrophysicist, and he basically makes the argument, the fine-tuning argument, which is credited to the Cambridge mathematician Paul Dirac, who implies that the universe's conditions are so precisely balanced that they suggest intentional design. And it says here that Dirac, celebrated as the father of antimatter, extended the conversation on the intersection of mathematics and divinity. He speculated that the universe's perfect balance is described through a mathematical theory of great beauty and power. Quote, God is a mathematician of a very high order, and he used very advanced mathematics in constructing the universe, Dirac said. So, yes, this coming together of mathematics and science and physics, with I think quantum has opened up this avenue as well, and showing that there's design behind this universe. And it makes a lot of sense just in the practical sense. I'm not disagreeing with what is being presented here. It's just the argument that's been made for a long, long time, and perhaps it was prevented from becoming more mainstream or mainline in academia precisely because, the world wasn't supposed to have the tools to actually, benefit from it yet. But now we do. So now everybody can get in on the idea here that everything now that we can create virtual realities, virtual worlds, we can program it, we can get in there and we can, simulate an entire environment, right? A 3-dimensional / 4-dimensional, if you consider time, the 4th dimension, space that you can manufacture. And so that has shifted a lot of people's thinking into wondering, what are we in now? Like, are we in some kind of design thing? And that's why the simulation theory has become popular. But really, if you're really honest with yourself, the reason why we can even do something like that, that we can create a artificial environment, a virtual simulation, is because we are creating it, which begs the question, who or what is creating us? This current three-dimensional experience and situation that you may find yourself in. And so that really points to God. Ultimately, it's like, yeah, it makes sense that there is a higher order of intelligence that is at play here, and it is out of our control. Now, you can speculate on as to who or what that is. That is your right to do so. But I think in terms of just the basic argument of God existing, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Just happens to be the same guy who's celebrated as the father of antimatter. And that's really interesting because we had some stories earlier this year on Canary Cry News Talk that covered how CERN was starting to move around antimatter. I think a year ago they said that, yeah, it's going to cost a lot, but we were able to contain antimatter. And now they're saying they can move it around campus. It's on a van. It just sounds like the beginning of a really bad Stargate type of movie, if you're being honest. But this intersection of mathematics and divinity, I think, is the bedrock for a massive change. A bedrock in the reenchantment, because this unlocks, this basically kills materialism and reductionism, like materialist, reductionist. A lot of what the atheistic worldview was founded on, which has been the argument. It's very interesting. Atheism is on a very deep, deep dip. It really does feel like a Tower of Babel moment where we're gonna, or we when I say we, humanity, these people believe that they are accessing, and they're coming at it from the road to where we are now comes from the materialist, reductionist, atheistic view. So they're sort of depleted of morals and ethics. And it makes sense. It's kind of interesting because, even though we're in this era where it's mathematically provable that God exists, the vacuum of ethics, morality, these things that really undergird how our society looks, especially at the highest levels, it almost feels intentional to go through that period of time when atheism was mainly the most popular sort of view out there. Because as we go back into reenchantment, now you not only have the vacuum of ethics for the people running stuff and doing stuff and pursuing all of it, much like the Freemasons believe in a type of God, right? they call him the great architect. And this is similar in a sense, he's in so many ways. It is the mainstreaming of the Freemasonic worldview, isn't it? You really think about it. Because if science and academia, they're all acknowledging God, but they see God as through mathematics, through materialism, reductionism, as the architect. Oh, it's clearly it's an intelligence, but he's an architect. Look at the architectry. it it is very Freemasonic, and not that it's totally wrong. It's just that when you focus too much on the mechanics, you get lost as well. So that's why we keep our distance, and especially when we're talking about spiritual mechanics. Now we're talking about things that are a little bit nebulous because they exist in the unseen realm. And speaking of the unseen realm, Variety, which is another one of these old school mainline outlets, headline here: Meanwhile on Earth, review aliens use human bodies to experience our planet in cleverly executed sci-fi drama from I Lost My Body director. Okay, so, you know, uh, the way in which propaganda is disseminated now is much, much different. Obviously, the independent media in entertainment media as well, through the adoption of internet outlets and platforms and moving away from legacy cable and satellite and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, the propaganda machine will move as well, and I can't keep up with all of it. I can only learn about these things through these articles, and maybe this is partly how I am becoming obsolete. Is that this is the case, and I'm not in there every day on Netflix or Hulu or something like that, and trying to spend a bunch of time watching these things because I don't have the time. I really don't. But I found this article interesting, and maybe some of you out there can go check this out and do a report of your own on it. I'm just going to read the parts that I find important here. Adrift, Elsa Megan Northam, a young caregiver with a talent for drawing, looks to the stars for answers about the whereabouts of her brother, her older brother, Frank, voiced by Sebastian Poderot, a cosmonaut who never returned to this planet from a mission. To her shock, the astral void will respond to her pleas, but not without major consequences. Then it talks a bunch about the directive and production editing type of choices, which is important too, but that's not really the point of this conversation here. I continue on here. One night, speaking to the vastness of the sky as if to communicate with her siblings, Elsa hears an answer back through the wind. It's in fact Frank asking her to pick up a glowing seed from the ground and insert it into her ear. A group of extraterrestrial entities, whose nameless leader, voiced by Dimitri Dor, is now speaking directly into Elsa's mind, has Frank hostage. They will return him to Earth if she helps him find a total of 5 people whose bodies they can take over. The hosts' consciousnesses will be put to sleep in a perpetual dream. With no other choice, Elsa marks their invisible portal in the woods. So basically, the plot here is that this gal Elsa is trying to communicate or, kind of spiritual moment with the sky, with the heavens of her brother, who's a cosmonaut who went out into space but never came back. But then now she gets some kind of message from a seed on the ground. But the message is one where these entities, whoever's speaking to her, is telling her that she needs to find 5 people so that these people or entities or whatever from this faraway place can have bodies. They could they could take over people's bodies, like possess people's bodies. Is that what this sounds like? Demonic activity, does it not? Like, okay, all right. Let me continue on here. But what do these aliens intended by roaming our planet in a random human body? The answer is fairly simple, though philosophically piercing. They want to feel, to exist for the sake of experiencing life without any ambitions or plans. These amorphous beings are eager to undergo the sensations and routines that most take for granted, providing an enlightened perspective to humanity's never ending pursuit of lofty goals. Are those with big plans and the mindset, resources, and discipline to accomplish them the only ones whose lives are worth preserving? Why is that question being asked? Or is there value in those who can't or won't partake in the rat race, namely the average majority, whose time alive may leave no indelible mark? Like, yeah, wrestle with this ethical question, everybody that watches this show. Is it better to preserve a few in a catastrophe, or is there value in the majority that the only way that they may get value is by being used by some entities from afar to have bodies? Yeah, it's a strange kind of plot, right? I continue here. Elsa's mission takes on such an ethical conundrum when she must play God, deciding who to sacrifice for the aliens to use as vessels and transmute into physical form. Okay, so there you go. I mean, you get the gist here. You have Kanye West saying he and Jay-Z are gods. You have shows basically saying you got to play God, in this ethical conundrum, putting the audience in the seat of God in a sense, like, oh, what would you do in this ethical conundrum, given this circumstance that you might find yourself in? Is it okay to sacrifice 5 innocent people and have their consciousness go to some kind of sleep state as some other entity takes over your body to experience physical life? I mean, what a crazy place we're in, right? With culture, that this is even being presented to an unsuspecting audience. And then you also have, obviously, as I mentioned before, the science of God being presented, the foundational aspect of it all. Now, this is where I do want to dive into some of the technology that is on the horizon. We have nationaldefensemagazine.org here. They have an article from a couple days ago. Israeli startups investigate mind-machine interfaces for defense applications. And obviously, they talk about Neuralink. They bring up super soldiers. And there's a quote here from Asaf Harel, neurotechnology lead in the CTO division of the Israeli Defense Ministry's Directorate of Defense Research and Development, who said, quote, "Imagine a world." That's always a good sign, right? When you're Defense Ministry Directorate starts off, imagine a world. It's like the magical words that gets everybody to agree to some crazy thing. Imagine a world where the training for a person to operate a drone or a helicopter or a plane is much more intuitive. So you're just doing whatever you think needs to happen, and it just happens. Imagine a world where you just think it happens, and you're doing whatever think needs to happen, it just happens. What he's talking about here is in your brain. Like, imagine you're sitting there and your brain is connected to some machine, and you just think about doing it. Like, I'm going to think about these 100 drones going in there and doing whatever they need to do, right? Imagine doing it. Now, also, what I think is also taking place, this has to be true. This is just my opinion. I don't have any hard proof of this. This is just a sentiment, a feeling I get, which is that this type of technology already exists. It's already been used for probably many, many years. And it's straight out of a Marvel movie. You know, you get some guy, he's maybe paralyzed or maybe not, who knows? And they get hooked up and, okay, use your brain and start flying these drones around, see what you can do. And this is in direct connection to remote viewing. All that research about remote viewing is directly tied, I believe, into drone technology. The invasion of all this into our minds is absolutely real. It's absolutely real, folks. Ziv Perriman, chief executive officer of Xtrodes, said his company is working on a patch that can be attached to the skin and can measure signals emitting from the body. So this article is not, it's more about technologies that don't need to invade your body. They're kind of pro mind control, not mind control, but like brain computer interface technology. They talk about, I think I should read this part. Israeli startup Gray Matters Health in 2023 received U.S. Food and Drug Administration approval, that's the FDA approval, to use its PRISM neuromodulation technology to treat post-traumatic stress disorder in soldiers or other survivors. Oh man, it's kind of like one of those things where that the very folks that caused this are also continuing this particular scam and I would say evil um, to treat the people with post-traumatic stress disorder and using this technology to help them. And here's the thing, it probably will help them. I don't have much doubt that it will actually help them. So that's where having these conversations becomes very difficult because it's going to help them. But at the same time, uh, is it just the case that the military industrial complex, the system, the beast, whatever you want to call it, continues to take advantage of these folks? And ultimately there's a give and take here. Like, yeah, they might be better off, but also, the whole system gets a little more data on how to control people's brains. So it's it's like this never-ending wheel, folks. So it goes on here. It talks about treating depression and neurotechnology with AI coming into the picture and how this is important long term to take care of these mental issues. But also, they point out something very interesting, and this is a topic that I learned from No Agenda, the No Agenda Show. If you go check that out, No Agenda Show with Adam and John. It says here, another is controlling the so-called amygdala hijack. The amygdala is the part of the brain that takes over in high stress, fight or flight situations, or even heated arguments. The blood flows from the thinking part of the brain to the amygdala, sometimes impairing a person's ability to think calmly and rationally. That is the kind of stress a warfighter encounters regularly in battle. Cohen said, quote, all of us are stressed now like we've never been before. Oh, I could just feel the stress off this guy when he says this. So, when the amygdala goes up, it cuts the blood with oxygen to our brain. And this is what happens to a lot of us when we argue and so on. And this is something that we need with smart sensors in real time to identify and let us know. Take it down, end quote. So they're literally saying, tone down the amygdala. It's too hot. The amygdala is too hot. Turn it down a little bit. But okay, so what if they want to turn it up? And I think they figured that out societally through social media, through all these things. They know how to do it. They know how to do it. So I find it so fascinating, the timing of everything, because as this technology becomes more readily available, the people, the population, the public who will be debating this will be mostly ideologically or in terms of worldview, many will believe in God or some type of spiritual reality. Because one of the things that we had always said about the mark of the beast is that it's going to be a spiritual issue. It's an issue of worship. It's an issue of allegiance and things of that nature. And at face value, all those aspects and elements are good things. They're good things that are desirable. And I also think that in the process, we're going to see some great things in this new landscape. You're going to see amazing deeds of good, like actual good deeds and good people and people with a desire to do well and to do good and to help others. And we're going to see all of those things. But like with everything, there's always going to be the flip side, the bad side. And that bad side just is going to keep getting worse if they continually have more and more access to the quantum field and, access to the livers of human brains, literally through, it doesn't even have to be microchip technology, folks. It can be this patch technology that reads brain signals. And if you can dial it down, if you can dial down that amygdala, then they can dial it up at any time, or maybe dial up other parts of the brain, or dial down other parts of the brain. And this is the type of situation that I feel is part of the reason why we need a new heaven and a new earth eventually. We kind of mess up creation really, really bad. So that's all I had for you guys today. It's just a brief rundown of some of the subset of cultural and theological and eschatological topics that are out there. It is fascinating that so many more people are up to speed on these issues. It's quite interesting. When we first started this, when my first published content in 2011, it wasn't very loud, or at least there weren't that many people discussing these issues. But now it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And part of it is amazing. It's amazing. It's incredible. It's amazing to see. But also, beware. Be careful. Be careful out there, because the devil prowls around, searching whom he can devour. And more, the net has been cast. As we get closer to the end, the traps are going to be made for believers, more and more the saints, because we know how it plays out there in Revelation 13. Not a great moment, not a great thing to, not a positive message, but ultimately a message of sacrifice, a message of true love from our Lord and Savior and Creator. And just got to bring it back to basics. Bring it back to basics. And if you haven't checked out the call-in shows that Basil's doing on Thursdays, go check that out, because he is a pastor, and he is sharing his knowledge and heart, really, as a pastor on that show, as a solo, more of a solo deal. And I've been enjoying it, and enjoying hearing people from the community. So go check it out. Canary Cry Callers or Collins. Do we have a name for this thing? I don't even know if we have a proper name. Yeah, Colin. Yeah, Colin the chameleon. If you want to stay plugged in with us, text Canary to 877-740-3226, and you'll be on the text message alert list, which just basically means you'll get a text message from us anytime we go live or something gets published. canarycry.party for all the links, and canarycry.support if you'd like to support us. We're value for value, which means no money from commies, cartels, corporations, and governments. I realized that we didn't include that, and it's almost like if I was looking at us, I'd be like, oh, why didn't they say government? But yeah, no government funding either, clearly, obviously. Doesn't even have to be said, but also maybe we should put it in there now that things are being exposed in that manner. Another way you can support us is going to cagerattlercoffee.com. This is not our product, but a member of the community who put this together. So go check that out, Cage Rattler Coffee. Give us your feedback, leave a comment, leave a reply wherever you're watching this, wherever you're listening to this, if it's on YouTube or Rumble or any of the other platforms. X, if you're on X, and if you're on X and you're not really interacting, come on, folks, come on, let's get it together. If you're on X, and you got to step it up, folks, got to step it up. Okay, that's all I have for you guys. God bless, and remember to think outside the cage.